you so much for joining us today. My name is Christy Schiller, and I'm the Vice President of Account Services at Presidium. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the Insurance Board for organizing this webcast so I can share some important information with you about maintaining youth protection practices during this unprecedented time. Presidium is grateful for the opportunity to partner with the Insurance Board to help you protect those that you minister to. Lots of folks are mourning not being able to be with their church community. And while it's important to stay as connected as possible, these are uncharted waters as it relates to youth protection. The usual rules simply do not apply. I'd like to share some ideas with you on how you can modify your youth ministry operations in the meantime, with a particular focus on being safe in electronic communications. We'll refresh on a couple of other best practices too that you might want to consider as well. A couple of housekeeping items. As a participant in the webcast, you'll receive a handful of resources today, namely a slide deck with all of the talking points and some specific guidelines for high-risk situations. So don't worry about needing to take down too many notes. You can also ask questions in the chat feature to the right of your screen. Please use this. I'll respond to those as quickly as I can, and everyone will have access to the most frequently asked questions and responses afterward. Any other questions can also be sent to me through the Insurance Board. Okay, let's get started. The COVID-19 crisis has inspired many organizations and individuals to step up and help however they can. We've seen our clients providing childcare for first responders, amplifying their outreach efforts to homeless populations, setting up food pantries, and pivoting overnight to teach students remotely. Individuals are also raising their hand to volunteer at places they never have before. As wonderful as it is to see this momentum, we have to tap the brakes a bit and think about whether our organization or church has core competencies in these programming or ministry areas, and also ensure that we continue to follow some of the fundamentals of youth protection. Tempting as it may be to help everywhere it's needed, this is not the time to start a new youth ministry. Different ministries have different risks, and we don't want anyone to have to learn the hard way what can go wrong. For example, if you don't typically provide childcare, it's probably not the best idea to jump into those waters. There are other ways you can contribute that are more likely in your wheelhouse. Let's face it, normal is a moving target. We're taking everything one day at a time. Just for some context, I wanted to give you a very brief overview about who Presidium is and how we approach this work. We were established in 1992 after our founder saw a need for youth-serving organizations to implement abuse prevention strategies. He was on the board of a local organization here in Texas, and unfortunately, they had an incident of abuse in an after-school program. So they asked him to help them understand how it could have happened and how they can make sure it never happens again. Being a clinical psychologist and a professor of social work, he gathered a team to do research on how abuse happens when youths are in the care of others outside of the home. At that time, in the 1980s, there was minimal scientific research on the issue. So the team reviewed hundreds of legal cases and found that there are actually patterns to where organizations have exposures. Understanding these patterns became the foundation of our work and has allowed us to help organizations fill these gaps and create checks and balances to actually prevent abuse, not just respond when it happens. We know from ongoing research and now 3 decades of experience that abuse happens not just because a bad person did a really bad thing, but because there was a breakdown somewhere in the system that allowed that situation to form in the first place and to escalate. You can find out more about our paradigm, what we call our safety equation, on our website. That will be included in your materials too. Okay, well, with that systems approach in mind, let's review some fundamentals, and then I'll give some suggestions for how to recalibrate within our new remote working reality. At the highest level, we know that there are 3 things needed for sexual abuse to happen. First, an adult needs access to a youth. Under normal circumstances, this is not hard in a church or a school. And even within our current virtual situation, you can still be accessed, and perhaps even more so with so much technology and devices. Access doesn't have to mean physical access. Inappropriate relationships can easily be formed virtually and can even lead to online sexual exploitation. Secondly, you need privacy. Abuse rarely happens in the view of others. And with an over-reliance on technology right now, the ability to be one-on-one with the youth is very high. The FBI published an alert last week regarding increased risk of online exploitation in our current reality and strongly urges parents to talk to their children about online safety. I've included a link to this press release in your resources so you can share those tips with your parents for new programs. Finally, there's a factor of control. This is where trust is gained and boundaries start to blur. Some people refer to this as grooming, but it may or may not be intentional. It could just be sloppy behavior or someone who's emotionally immature. Either way, when not interrupted, boundary violations can escalate into abuse. And so let's talk about some of your operations and how they've changed and how we can try to mitigate access, privacy, and control. The first part of your youth protection system we should consider is your current policies. Policies are at the heart of any prevention program. And I promise I'm not here to advocate completely overhauling them, but thought needs to be given to how much we need to adjust and redefine what is and what is not acceptable while interacting with youth, mostly online. We've seen well-meaning adults make mistakes with boundaries online, even before this situation. I'll go over some specific best practices in a little bit, but first let's cover some high-level concepts to consider when looking at your policies. When reviewing them, just keep in mind you're going to need some flexibility. Things are changing rapidly, so know that you will need to adapt along the way. A good first step is to consider which policies you should continue to enforce, such as rules about not communicating with youth via private emails, text, or social media in accordance with regular policy. Then think about where change is needed. For example, if you don't have guidelines for when electronic communications happen, like they shouldn't be happening late at night, those will need to be developed. Most importantly, everyone needs to know the rules. It's just as critical for youths and parents to know the boundaries so they can help enforce them. If parents don't know that a teacher or youth minister is not supposed to text their child individually, they may even encourage it. So urge everyone that if they're not sure if something is okay, ask. Again, whether someone has the intent to abuse or is just being sloppy with boundaries, we are doing everyone a disservice by not being clear what the boundaries are. Factor in the concepts of access, privacy, and control as you determine what is still going to be required and what needs to be modified or developed. I'll give some more specific suggestions on boundaries for electronic communications shortly. Please don't hesitate to share in the chat how you communicated updated expectations with staff, youths, and parents. Love to see that. Next, think about your screening and training practices. It might be difficult to screen new volunteers quickly and thoroughly right now, but to the extent you can follow your normal protocols, do so. If you have to make exceptions, limit the access a lesser screened volunteer has with youths by increasing supervision where you can. You can also make more of an effort to reach out to youths and parents via email or survey to see how things are going. It's all about finding a balance to keep providing ministry as safely as possible. This may actually be a good time to offer online training to your staff and volunteers. People may have a little downtime, and it keeps these concepts front of mind for however they may be working with youths now and as things shift over the next several months. I'd love to see what kind of challenges or successes you've had in these areas in the chat as well. Okay, let's dive in now with specific boundary guidelines and ways to minimize access, privacy, and control to keep everyone safe while ministering remotely. Here are some things to think about that might work for your church. One thing you could do is establish uniform guidelines addressing, for example, are we limiting ourselves to audio conversations only, or are video conversations allowed as well? Are there particular platforms that should be used? And under what circumstances are there exceptions to that? Again, set parameters on when staff may interact with students and youths and keep a log of them. Let youths and parents know these boundaries so they can help enforce them. And always communicate with youth through designated or authorized group pages or group profiles when you can on social media platforms like Facebook or WhatsApp. And you'll want to send and reply to text messages with youth in these group messages, preferably with a supervisor or another staff member or parents copied in. Again, it's all about transparency. Require staff and youths to dress appropriately during video communications. Keeping a professional appearance helps reinforce boundaries and keep things from becoming too casual. Be mindful of your surroundings and what could potentially be seen or heard. Try to be in a home office or living room rather than a bedroom. And of course, you can't guarantee that there won't be an appearance by a needy pet or a small child. But depending on the platform, there may even be options to blur the background or have a custom backdrop. In the spirit of transparency and minimizing privacy, consider recording sessions. I've spoken with several school districts that are doing this, or alternatively, they may invite a parent or another staff or volunteer to sit in if that works for the situation. Of course, if staff are providing pastoral support or counseling and a youth needs a one-on-one conversation, keep a log of these sessions. Document the platform used, the date, the time, the length of the session, name of the person, and if a situation arises that could be misinterpreted, feels uncomfortable, or causes concern. Ensure that your staff are designating their personal social media profiles to private, so youth can't try to friend them or access their personal information. Continue to follow your rules about what can and cannot be addressed in these types of conversations. And share with parents of youth in your programs if staff are getting these requests for virtual one-on-one sessions, emphasizing that this won't be common practice once things get back to normal, and share contact information with them in case they have a concern or a question. And last tip here, just be mindful of wording choices and avoiding things that can be misinterpreted. You can express empathy and affection, but be prudent. So saying, I hope you and your family are staying safe versus I miss you so much and I need to see you. Just got to keep in mind the youth and how they may hear that. So this is a lot to think about, but the main theme is that now more than ever, it's important that employees and volunteers that are working with youths are mindful about boundaries. It's really easy to get casual when we're at home in our pajamas, but you can still be responsive and available to youths within an established range. I'm sure some of you have developed great ways to manage these situations, so please share them in the chat if you'd like. And of course, any other situations that would be helpful to have some feedback on. Okay. Finally, let's remember your systems for responding to concerns, what we might call red flag situations, and also to reporting suspected abuse. When we think about red flag behaviors, so these are boundary violations, policy violations, or other behaviors that are inappropriate, keep this in mind. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to try to minimize barriers that may keep someone from coming forward with a concern. When you don't see each other every day, it's harder to have the opportunity for a casual, hey, heads up conversation. Actively solicit feedback as to whether there is anything they want to talk about when you do have an opportunity to connect with staff and volunteers or parents. Encourage staff to discuss any concerns about red flag behaviors with their supervisor immediately, and follow your existing internal reporting chains. And don't forget to document the situation and make sure it gets in that person's file. It's harder to see a pattern when this information is not centralized. And of course, as I keep saying, share ways with parents and youths to report concerning behaviors. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, unfortunately, we've seen an increase in reports of child abuse of all varieties during this crisis. Communicating remotely with youths may make you privy to information that a youth might not typically share at church. You may even observe or overhear something that makes you question a youth's safety. So let's just review some of the signs of different types of abuse. With physical abuse, you may see bruises, unexplained injuries, burns, broken bones, anxiety or depression, or social maladjustment. With psychological or emotional abuse, we see depression, low self-esteem, lack of social skills, insecurity, substance abuse. With neglect, there's malnourishment, wearing dirty or unfit clothing, poor hygiene, or developmental delays. And with sexual abuse, we see a sudden change in behavior, severe anxiety or depression, a fear of being touched or of being alone with a certain person, or even self harm. Of course, we know that some youths may be feeling anxious or not themselves given all of the changes in their lives in the last few weeks. But don't talk yourself into assuming a change in behavior is simply a result of the current situation. If you genuinely suspect something is wrong, that's the time to act. And if a youth discloses abuse is happening in his or her life, be sure to listen without blame, criticism, or judgment. Remain calm, reassure the youth, and document their exact words, not your interpretation of them. And of course, report internally and to the local authorities. In most states, anyone who works with youth is going to be considered a mandated reporter. So that has to happen. And remember, it's never your responsibility to probe or investigate. Always report the allegation to the authorities and to your supervisor. I'm sure everyone would like to go back to how things were at the very beginning of this year, but we probably need to assume it's going to be a protracted return to our old normal. The practices you adopt in the meantime may be needed for a while, so be sure to over communicate as you adjust so everyone knows what the rules are. Thank you for the work that you do to serve youths. They need us now more than ever, and we need a safe place to help them process through all of these changes. I'd like to thank the Insurance Board again for sponsoring this webcast. I hope you found the time of value. And as a reminder, you'll get a copy of this presentation, and it includes other links to resources that we've developed in response to the COVID-19 situation, and I hope you find those helpful. You'll also be able to access the FAQs that have been happening in the chat, and I'm happy to stay here a while longer to get to any more questions. And here's some great news. You may be eligible for free or discounted Presidium services through the Insurance Board. So visit their page to learn more and to check out other resources and upcoming webcasts. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.